Focus on back mobility when there's restrictions or pain. We're going to start here with the cat camels. We're going to ease up and down with the mid and lower vertebrae, and we're going to have a nice movement fluidly going up and down, and then adding these wiggles side to side. This is going to start to loosen up those muscles and supporting tissue all around the vertebrae. We're just going to do all these movements in the range of movement that feels comfortable for us at the point we're working at now. Then we're going to take things up to the downward dog. We're going to do this nice and gently, and we're going to just have a nice feel forward and back of how much range of movement we can have in terms of how high we can be. And we're going to march those heels and ease into the stretch, the hamstrings, the glutes, and round into the lower back. Then we're going to come across underneath with the knee and into the pigeon stretch. The position of that forward leg is going to be dependent on your mobility and how that feels. We're going to have a nice little move around, forward, side to side, and see how that feels. Then we can add this little twist, call this the twisty pigeon. So we're going to get a nice stretch around that one side of the lower back and round into the glutes as well. All these movements and that movement, how far we go, how far we twist, is going to be dependent on what you can do at the time, depending on any pain, any restriction, and your current level of mobility. And over time, we're going to be looking to improve that, especially if we end up reducing the pain and working through the restrictions to improve our mobility and improve the pain and improve our movement. So pigeon, we're going to do on both sides. So here we are repeating that again. You might well find with these movements at one side than the other, there's actually different amounts of mobility or different amounts of restriction on each side. We want to try and focus a little bit more on that side that is maybe not working as well, but also always focus on both sides to keep a nice balance going throughout the body. Next, we've moved into this 90-90 position. So one leg across the front and one knee coming back. And we're going to aim to sit up as tall as we can, using a hand on the floor. We could even use a hand on something like a bench or a sofa to keep us upright, so we get that nice stretch on the top hip where my hand is there, and then just rotate around in that position. We can progress this in a couple of different ways. Here's one as we lean forward and create another stretch around the lower back and the glute on the side where the leg is at the front. All this time, we've got the external rotation on the hip at the back and at the top, and that is going to be really, really beneficial. Sometimes it really feels like that really builds up in terms of lactic acid and static movement, and that's just an indication of what we need to do in terms of continuing to practice this movement to get that external rotation feeling more comfortable. Another couple of progressions then, just on a knee lift, and now doing a foot lift. Aim to keep up as tall as you can in that position, and again, it's one side then the other, so we're going to repeat this on the other side. And once again, we might well find that we have got a side that is a bit tighter, a bit more restricted. So here again, we focus on being as tall as we can and getting into a comfortable position, and focus on the external rotation on that hip that is at the side towards the back. Again, we can repeat the lean forwards, the folds down, and like the other positions, it is going to be dependent on how much mobility you've got in that position, and over time improving that mobility by regularly practicing these movements. So doing around about 3 leans forward, and then we're going to do the knee lifts. Focus on keeping up tall, focus on not too much of a movement that's going to take us out of shape, but gain a nice movement in that external rotation, and then as well doing the foot lift and gain that rotation into the hip. Then from here, we're again working side to side. So we're going to do a kneeling hip flexor stretch, up nice and tall, focus on contracting the glute. In the pop-up there, in the window at the top, we've actually got this in doing this version of the couch stretch, and that is where we will have a foot up on a bench at the back. I'm using a pad, you can use a cushion to make that comfortable. Essentially, we've got the same position, but that is a progression. Having that foot up, you're going to get more stretch down the front of the quad, down the hip flexor, and more stretch into the hips and the lower back. Then we're going to repeat on the opposite side. And what we're doing here as well is an overhead pull and just moving across from the hip of the knee that is down. That's going to create extra mobility, and it is extra challenge into the hip and through the sides of the body. From there, going back to the floor, and we're going to do the butterfly stretch. So feet together and a little press out with the elbows. We're looking at opening up the adductors there on the inside of the leg. Sometimes these get tight, sometimes we get injuries there, and this is often what people mistake for actually. For a groin injury, it's more likely to be a hip flexor restriction or adductor restriction, so we're working on that there. And then we're going to sit in this straddle position comfortably, but as wide as possible, and we're going to do a little lean across. So actually promoting movement again in the spinal column, this time laterally. And we're going to take a little second each side, a little stretch across, and we're going to repeat this kind of 3 or 4 times each side. This is really going to help that spinal movement, that spinal mobility, and feed down into the lower back and the hips. Now, sometimes it's really, really hard to even get moving, get on the floor to do these movements. So we're going to scale it back here. This is the cat camels with the hands just resting on a bench, bringing that height up so we can keep ourselves standing and just bending over. This is a really nice one to do if that pain is actually quite severe, just to promote movement back into that area, also promoting blood flow. Then we can take the hands back and get up into the downward dog position, but just with that little flexing of the ankles, and here I'm pushing back just to create that stretch that looks a little bit like the downward dog, but we haven't gone to that bigger angle that we would get down on the floor. So you're moving back into whatever position at this point feels comfortable. Then from here, we're going to do something that's similar to the kneeling hip flexor stretch and the count stretch. We're going to bring the foot up, and we're going to bring our hands inside the foot as far as we can. It might not be that you can, at this point, that you could reach the bench, and actually just getting into that foot raised and knee forward position is enough to get a stretch around the back, the glutes and the hamstrings. So we're just going to sit into that position, and you'll be able to see better on this side. The extra thing we can do is like a little knee push out and just promoting movement into the hips. This is really, really good when we feel really restricted, maybe a little bit of pain, to get us going again.